Hello? There we are. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about how to patch stupid. I look at it and I hear all the time this, I guess, misnomer that you can't patch stupid. Real quickly, before we get started, get a show of hands. How many people have said patch stupid in the audience here? Yeah, there's a lot of people. That's a common that you can't patch. So what I'm here to say is I'm gonna talk about how to deal with engineering risks associated with the end user. And the thing is, we can fix stupid. And the reality is if you say you can't, you already failed. So what we're going to talk about today is methodologies that are effective for users to stop clicking. So if you have a security awareness program, especially if you do it yourself program, maybe you have a phishing tool, buy content. These are some methodologies that you can use to make your program. The methodologies that my company uses in the product, and them open as part of the HumanSAMM, Human Security Assurance Maturity Model, if you want a tongue twister. So, with no ado, I'll jump in. He just pretty much gave my intro, so we'll skip through that slide. So social engineering is sort of my thing. Before I get into it, I want to give you some fun things that you can do. Most penetration testers do a lot of traveling. So for those of you that travel a lot, here's a fun thing you can do to feel like a little bit of a badass the next time you're on an airplane. Pick an aisle seat and make sure you board before most people. And then what I want you to do is make eye contact, and don't let the eye contact lapse, but make eye contact with every big dude that comes onto the airplane. The first thing they're going to do is this. And I don't know, I think it's hilarious. Yeah, social engineering is sort of my thing. It's my specialty. It's what I'm passionate about. And it's what I want to really find a solution for. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So here's a video that really is the premise for this entire topic. This is, I was watching Lemony Snicket's with my family, and this particular scene here I feel is an accurate portrayal of modern security. So let me hit play.
This door has been installed with top-of-the-line security system. You can't get inside unless you have 19 keys, 3 combinations, 2 fingerprints, and 1 optical scan. Or, as I share with my most trusted associates, turning this doorknob right here.
So that's our security. The reality is all of our security controls, everything, all the technology that we buy and we implement can be bypassed by targeting users. So users are a really big problem, and we don't want our security to look like this, but that is corporate security in today's world. So targeting users has always got me in. Me and the teams I've worked with, we actually have never once not been able to get into a network, and furthermore, never once not been able to get domain admin. In fact, my former Pentest lead is right here in the audience. But yeah, we've never not been able to get in. And I don't say that to brag, I say that because there's a really big problem around human security. And it's not because they didn't have the right security controls in place. It's because they didn't have the right human controls in place that we were always able to get in. So let's look at it. Let's say you have a SQL injection vulnerability on your perimeter. And as a hacker, I can either exploit that or I can target your users. So what is the advantage of going after the SQL injection? I mean, when I get it, am I not still in your DMZ? Do I not have to privilege escalate and pivot into a better network? Whereas if I target your users, I'm immediately on your user LAN. I get access to your sensitive data almost immediately. I bypass almost all of your security controls. So I think that this is really key. Until we can fix this, I would argue that all of your vulnerabilities on your perimeter, everything that you do around your perimeter, is really not super effective, because you can exploit a user and bypass everything. So the hackers are always going to target your users if you don't properly secure them. So the question is, how do we do that? So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the HumanSAMM, or Human Security Assurance Maturity Model. This is the first in a series of talks. We aspire to be able to address all incidents of human error in SecOps. But for right now, we're going to start with the biggest, most glaring vulnerability, and that is users doing stupid things and getting your networks infected. It's our opinion that every single incident is a result of human error. Now, I get only like 90% is due to phishing. But when you actually look at it, there's a lot of other examples. And here are some really obvious ones, or clicking on fishes, or opening malicious attachments. But here's some other ones. Maybe you let or somebody come in off your badge swipe, or you let them tailgate behind you. Maybe you give all of your users local admin access in your network. That's human error. Maybe you leave default credentials on something. Actually, sort of a hilarious story. I did a Pentest a few years back, and they were setting up a brand new password reset, or self-service password reset tool. Now, they put this inside their DMZ, and they left default credentials on it. So we were able to sync their entire Active Directory over to a database that we set up, and because of this human error, day one, on the first host we looked at, got domain admin. And the reality is that these things are very, very common, and so what we aspire to do is address all of the human errors. Here's a few other examples, such as, when your IT ops or your InfoSec personnel, they don't know policies or processes, and so they don't know how to properly handle incidents as they come in. All these things contribute to make matters worse and to make us less secure. So let's jump into it real quickly. This can absolutely be done, but it's not going to be easy. That's my quick disclaimer. If you want to secure your users, you've got to be willing to invest time and resources into it. It's not an easy fix, and it's definitely not a technology fix. It is a human fix to be able to stop this. So, first thing I'm going to talk about is why your current programs aren't working. One of the biggest issues is what I like to call binge training. I'm sure everybody in this room has been through a training that was 45 minutes to an hour and a half long and bored the hell out of you. Has anyone been bored to death by security awareness training? I guess everybody. That's a lot of hands. Wow. So it's one of those things that if we want to get users to listen, we have got to change the way we're doing it. Binge training worked in the past. It was great in the 90s. But in modern day, in our modern era, it does not address our needs and our security concerns. So a couple things about binge training. The average person has an attention span of 8 seconds. 8 seconds, that's the average attention span. So when we give training where we try and cover all of the topics that we want to go over for an entire year in one day, over the course of a couple hours, we are missing almost all of it. It's not even getting into their brain. It's lost on deaf ears. And so binge training doesn't work. We need to do higher frequency training on a regular basis and keep it entertaining and short. But I'll jump into that a little bit later. One other point before I move forward is that our threats they evolve daily. They don't evolve yearly. So training people once a year is just not effective, and it's not going to keep up with the threats that are coming in and targeting our users on a daily basis. Another thing about binge training is that let's take the user who actually paid a ton of attention in the training. And unlike everyone else, they don't have a second attention span. They have, maybe an hour attention span, and they listen to everything we said. That's the perfect user, right? They're still gonna screw up because they, after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, however long it is, they will get laxed. They will forget about that training, and they will start making mistakes. And so we have to keep security awareness in front of our users constantly. Now, the next issue, because when we wanted to figure out how to fix security awareness, the first thing is to identify the problems with current security awareness training programs. But the next issue is that most programs are horrible at metrics. Let me ask, does anyone in the room apply or assign a user risk based on risky behavior for every user in your company? Okay, so I would argue that just like our systems, that we scan for vulnerabilities, we need to be scanning our humans for vulnerabilities. And we need to know the risk because we can do things accordingly. So we need better metrics. In this industry, I feel like in cybersecurity as a whole, there's a lot of premature success that's being celebrated. They send out one fish and no one clicks on it. And all of a sudden, they have a 0% click rate. And everyone's 100% secure. That's not reality. It's a moment in time. It really doesn't mean anything. So one of the really interesting things that I learned when we started, we created this really nice baseline, and we're thinking, well, our baseline, it's going to catch every user. It's better than any other baseline in the market. What we found out was that right around 50% of the risk users at this organization, or really at every organization, they did not show up during the baseline. They didn't show up until month 1 or month 2. And so ongoing user risk assessment that allows us to truly understand who our risk users are. And it gives us better metrics. Some other metrics that we might want to track. I talked earlier about user retention. So if we know that a user has a propensity to forget about their training after 4 months, why can't we increase the amount of training and the frequency of the simulations at 3 months to make sure that they never relapse in the first place? So there's a lot you can do with metrics. Other metrics, look at what types of fishes they're susceptible to. It's not uncommon that you find entire departments that have poor business practices that make them more at risk. So maybe it's not the fault of the employee, but it's the fault of our business processes. And so by tracking these things, we can get a lot more of detail about our users, and we can adapt accordingly. And that's actually the next big issue, is that typical training programs are one size fits all. This is huge. You cannot expect that every user in your company needs the exact same amount of education. And furthermore, if I have to train to the average employee, I cannot be as effective and do as much as I need to with the high-risk employees without causing a significant disruption to the overall operations. I mean, the reality is, in our jobs, we would love to just focus on security, but efficiency and keeping people doing their day job and what they're supposed to do is highly important. So why can't we adjust every single training program down to the individual user? Or at minimal, if you can't do every single user, because in do-it-yourself programs, they're not quite that adaptive, but you can definitely create multiple lists. So why not identify who is a high-risk user, who's a medium risk user and who's a low risk user, and at least adjust your training accordingly. And that way you can do a lot more with your high risk users, and also you can do a lot less with your low risk users. They have proven they don't need all of the training, so let's not give it to them, and that frees up more resources for the high risk users. Other things about one size fits all, I think this room gets it more than anyone, is because you're all very knowledgeable about security. And so when you get this training that's telling you what spyware is, it seems a little bit patronizing and like they're talking down to you. So a lot of users will turn off completely because, well, they already know it. They don't need this education. And so it almost comes off as patron content. So when we can adapt to their risk level, we can actually avoid that and prevent them from turning off and not listening to the message we're trying to give them. So another big issue we saw when we were trying to identify what are the problems with security awareness programs was, I don't see almost any programs ever get their hands dirty, essentially. They're not working with the users. They want to rely, most programs or most companies want to rely 100% on technology. When it comes to a people problem, technology alone cannot solve it. And I mean, you can do a lot with technology. I would argue you can get 99.5% of your employees to quit clicking on stuff with technology alone. But that last 0.5%, your highest risk users from the beginning. They are the ones that click on everything. They represent a hell of a lot more than 0.5% of your overall user risk. So to drive 99.5% of people to stop clicking, in my opinion, it's not good enough. We have got to get better, because hackers, they don't need 99% of people to click. They need one. Exactly. And so in the average assessment that we would do, we were sending out hundreds of phishes. So if you get 99% of your users to not click, and I send out 800 phishes, guess what? I just got 8 backdoors into your network. That's not good enough. It's a guaranteed access into your network. And so what we can do is work with the employee. And so little things make a really big difference. Picking up the phone and calling the employee and saying, hey, we noticed you've been really struggling with the attack emulations that we've been doing lately, and you've clicked on quite a few of them. Is there anything that I can do to help you? And it sounds like we're really, being super nice, but the reality is this makes a difference. It creates a human connection. And all of a sudden, to that employee, it's not technology alone. It's not impossible. There's a lot of users that see cybersecurity as being something that only hackers could understand. And they immediately, when it comes to training, sort of give up. I can't do that. It's way too complicated for me. So making that human connection and letting them know they're not in it alone, but also making sure that at the same time that they're being monitored, that we are aware of their risk, it makes a very big difference. Other things I mentioned earlier about how you might find business processes that are a problem. This is where you can, if you find an entire department is more susceptible, do a focus group. Find out why they're clicking. Ask them, what made you click on this? And you might be surprised at the answers you get from the employee. So getting involved and working with the employees, and if needed, getting a little bit not so nice with them to make sure that they know that they are part of the problem instead of being part of the solution, it makes a huge difference. So not using human intervention, not actually getting involved, is what I think is a major problem with cybersecurity training. Yes? So yeah, we absolutely do role-based stuff. You know, for the purposes of today's talk, it's more about how you can take a do-it-yourself program and make it more successful. But absolutely, yeah, you should be looking at what roles the users are in. A couple of great examples are, well, last month we had a domain admin at one of the companies that we work for fall into our high-risk users group. Can anyone guess what happened? Well, no, somebody lost domain admin access. But yeah, so it is important to look at roles. Maybe this person processes credit cards, or maybe even worse, they're domain admin or a network admin. So roles play a very key factor in here. Thank you for bringing that up. So the next thing, and I'm going to pick on all the pen testers in the room a little bit here, is I see a lot of internal programs that phish users, but they exploit their users. How many people exploit their users when they do phishing exercises? Okay, I would argue you're missing an opportunity to educate when you exploit your users. If it's a pen test, absolutely exploit them. That's the goal. You want to get in. But if it's not a pen test and it's just a normal phishing exercise with your employees, you're missing a huge opportunity, because at the moment that mistake is realized, they are way more likely to learn and they're way more open and receptive to what we're saying. And so they already clicked on a link. I mean, if you have an outdated browser or the bad guy has a 0-day, it's game over already. We don't have to see, will they, after they click on the link, type in their credentials, or open this attachment and run it. What we should be doing is educating them and make it simple and invoke emotion. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a little bit here, but how you can invoke emotion. Keep your message simple. Maybe the landing page says nothing but think before you click, and has a nice image to sort of anchor it home and get that emotional response to anchor it into their emotions. So we need to be educating at the mistake is realized. So we actually follow it up, and I would highly recommend, if your technology can do this, that as soon as somebody clicks on a phish, you have a follow-up email that hits their inbox before they even get back to it. So while they're on the landing page, email hits their inbox that says, hey, you just clicked on this phish. Here is the phish you clicked, and here's all of the red flags that you missed that could have helped prevent you from clicking on it. It gives an opportunity to help them understand that they were phished. It helps us encourage them to do better at responding and alerting us to the phish, because the reality is the first goal is to get them to stop clicking. The second goal, and I think the important goal, is to get them to start reporting. That is when you create a true human firewall, is when it can not only block attacks, but report on them. So yeah, just-in-time education is highly important, and we need to include more of it in our training programs. The next one, and I think it's obvious, is boring content. I have watched so many videos from different security awareness training companies, and most of them, the really short videos on average in our industry, are 4 minutes long. And it takes them about 2 minutes to get to the point of what the video is about. And I don't know about you guys, but I've generally stopped listening about 30 seconds into it. So even if our content isn't super entertaining, we should at least make it short enough and straight to the point that our users can focus, they can stay on board, and they can get the message. We don't have to give them 10 messages. We need to get one message across for every time we're interfacing with our users. So boil down your messaging and figure out what it actually is that you want to educate your users on, and don't try and cover a bunch of topics. Cover one topic at a time. video here. This is an example, if I can find my mouse here. This is an example of a video. This is one that we use, that we try and keep things fun and entertaining. So I guess the proof will be if I get a bunch of laughs here. Hold on.
Your account has been hacked. Somebody guessed your password.
Well, how did they know? I picked something so random.
Was it dolphin?
I gotta take this. Hello?
So this is an example of how we can get the users more engaged. What did you get out of that? I hope you walked away with 2 points. Pick a good password and don't use something that everyone can guess. Now, when it comes to guessing, one of the most successful attacks that as a penetration tester I know will get me access as long as they don't have multi-factor authentication on everything is what we call password spraying or reverse brute force. And so I don't guess a bunch of passwords against one user. I guess one password against a bunch of users. This time of year, it's going to be spring 17 or spring 2017. But the reality is this time of year, it's very easy and it's amazing. I've seen so many winter, in fact, most recent one I did, the most popular password was winter 16. So this is a big problem. We can guess people's passwords. It's incredibly common. So what I want you to walk away with there is make your videos memorable or at least engaging down to, like enough to get them to remember a point. They don't have to remember all of it as long as they get the key messaging points and they walk away with them. So the next thing before I get out of the problems with SATE and into the solutions is, oh, by the way, SATE is Security Awareness Training and Education. I use that acronym all the time, so in case you weren't aware of it, that's what SATE means. But we're not phishing our users enough. I'm curious, how many people phish their users at least once a year? How many people phish their users at least once a quarter? How many people phish their users at least once a month? And as we go through this, the amount of hands up in the air are lowering. So here's what I have to say about phishing. You can be in your user's inbox, or only the bad guys can be in their inbox. It's up to you. But I promise the bad guys are targeting your users, they're phishing your users, and it's only a matter of time before a ransomware outbreak or a malware outbreak, or even worse, a targeted attack. So it's my opinion that the best way to condition your users and prepare them for attacks is to attack them yourself. So there's things you can do, like you subscribe to a threat intelligence feed and you find out that there is one particularly nasty phish that is targeting different people in your industry. And it hasn't hit your users yet, but it's hit 3 of your competitors. So if I don't want my users to fall for this phish when they get it in the wild, why don't I phish them first? Make sure that they see the attacks from me before they ever see them from the bad guys. We have got to phish our users more. So in my company, our low-risk users that get the least amount of content and phishing emulations, we are phishing every user at least twice per month. Why? Because people change. You can have a low-risk user today that next week maybe is going through a divorce and they've got a lot of personal stuff happening, or maybe a death in the family. And all of a sudden, this low-risk user that we didn't think we had a problem with starts doing a lot of really stupid things, and they start clicking on things that they shouldn't, and opening the company up to potential attacks and risk. And so by constantly phishing your users, you are able to do what I call ongoing baselining. And you can identify the risk or your risk users within the organization and adapt accordingly. Now, I will put a caveat there. If your users are low risk, they don't need a simple Nigerian-style phish. Obviously, they're not going to fall for you just won the lottery. But a high-risk user, they probably always think they won the lottery, or their rich relative from Abu Dhabi or wherever just left them millions of dollars. If they're a high-risk user, you should be giving them phishing emulations or attack emulations of varying degrees of difficulty. If they're a low-risk user, you should just give them the most difficult ones that you send. But the reality is we need to phish our users. Either the bad guys are going to be in their inbox or you can be in their inbox. So, the next thing is that we're not doing enough to motivate employees. Now, some things that can be done to motivate employees are very simple, such as doing gamification. Maybe you have a major multinational corporation and you can have your European employees compete against your American employees to see who's the most secure. There's a lot we can do to motivate them. One of my favorite things that we do is we created what we call scareware. And so the very first time you run it, it tells you that it is infecting and spreading to the entire network, and it's encrypting everything. Obviously it's fake, but it's meant to invoke an emotion and scare them. So the first time it just does that, it changes their background, and it plays some really loud noises on their microphone after it turns up the speaker. Not microphone, but their speaker. And the idea is to embarrass them and scare them into remembering this lesson, that it's a horrible idea to run a random executable that you got from an email that you weren't expecting. So phase 2, we actually take it to a next level, and we have a bunch of pop-up boxes. Now these pop-ups are above everything. You cannot close them. The only thing you can do is click a little button that says, I understand. And so the first thing it says is, hey, it's a horrible idea to run that executable. You know, I forget all the exact details, but it says that's a horrible idea. And they say, I understand. And so there's like 13 different I understand messages they have to click through before they get their computer back. So these are things we can do to get the users more engaged. The other thing is we can include emotional stimuli in our landing pages. And in just a moment here, I'm going to show you an example of one of the types of landing pages that we use to do that. But your landing pages, imagery is powerful. And you can get a lot of emotions just off of a single image and a very basic message. So we need to do more to motivate our employees when we're doing training. And another element there is keep what you're doing entertaining. Users will pay a lot more attention if you make it fun. It doesn't have to be boring and horrible. And in fact, when it is, they generally think, this is too complex for me. I'm never going to understand cybersecurity, so I can't do it. Or maybe, and here's another really common one I see, they have this faith in the SecOps team and all the security controls they have, and they think they could click on anything, even the most malicious of links, and nothing's going to get through into my network. This is common. This is actually what some of your users think. So we need to do more to motivate them and help them to understand that A, they are part of the problem, or B, they are part of the solution. Ideally, we want them to always be part of the solution versus part of the problem. But if they're not part of the solution, they need to know they're part of the problem. The next thing is we're just not enough sustained vigilance. Like I said earlier, we want users to stop clicking on malicious links, but that is only the first step. The most important thing to me as getting them to report. I mean, to have a true human firewall, your users don't just ignore a phishing email, but they report the phishing email and they let people know immediately that something's happening so that we can immediately turn around and let all the other users know that multiple users from the company have been targeted today, and here's the fish, and please don't click on it should it come through. So, the solution. I've talked a lot about the solution as we've gone through here, but let's jump into it. The first thing is that you need to customize. Now, the way we do it is we customize down to the individual user. There are over 1,000 different pathways that any one user can take from start to finish. But I get that not everyone can do that. Not everyone has that technology. But what we can do is adjust according to user risk. And when I say user risk, I'm not talking about their role. Their roles and their job function is very important. We need to include that into our data. But I'm talking, are they clicking on fishes? Are they engaging with our educational content? Are they responsive at all to us? And so based on all different factors, now we know this user's low risk, high risk, medium risk. And we should be educating accordingly. Don't just make it one size fits all. At minimal, make it 3 sizes fits all. High, medium, and low risk. And get aggressive with your high risk users. It shouldn't be that many people. I find it generally starts out high, somewhere around 20 to 30%, but within just a few months of ongoing education, that high risk user group drops significantly. It's generally around 1 to 5% of employee base. So to get highly aggressive with them, to get them to stop clicking on things, is not horribly invasive on the company, especially because you have that low risk user group too, where you barely do anything for them other than monitor to make sure they stay low risk and send them at least 1 educational email per month to make sure that you're keeping it top of mind. So do what I call mass customization. This, to me, if you take nothing else away from this talk, it is to measure everything and adjust accordingly. So that's actually the next one, is data is incredibly important. You cannot fix what you don't measure. You have to understand what's going on. Every last person in here, I guarantee, scans your computers and systems on your network for vulnerabilities. Why are we not doing that for our users? And we need to be doing that for our users. And we should assign a risk for every single user in the network. Yes? I mean, that's just part of the education, ongoing education. The biggest thing that, from a testing perspective, it's a lot harder to test for insider threat. But what we're looking at is we're constantly educating people. And so during that education, one of the things we hit on is insider threat and report everything. If you're suspicious about something, let somebody know so that they can make decisions about that, which is the pretty common insider threat training. But when you do it constantly, every single month or every single week, depending on the risk, users are getting educational emails. You keep it top of mind. And so one thing I've noticed in a lot of these programs for insider threat training is that right after, at least for some government agencies I've worked for, right after they do the training, there tends to be a lot of people saying, oh, hey, there's this suspicious thing going on. And so it's funny, if you get 6 months down the road after they did the training, people aren't likely to, if you see something, say something. So by keeping it in front of them, you're always reminding them to say something if they see something. And so it's perfect? No, but it's certainly better than the typical approach. Yes?
How do you respond to false positives with training? What can we do to adjust training to lower some of that?
What do you mean false positives?
Like if you see something, say something. The first week afterwards,
To me, that's part of the human firewall. You're going to get a lot of false positives. You're going to have people report things that aren't legit, but they're reporting. And even if only 1 out of every 10 things that gets reported turns out to be true, it doesn't matter. It's a human thing. You have to have humans involved to look at it logically and say, you know, does this make sense? Do we need to escalate this? Does it seem like this person's actually doing something? So no, you're never going to be able to completely eliminate the false positives. I would argue that if you have a problem with false positives, that's a really good problem to have because your users are reporting. Yeah? We have a suppression list for them. They don't even go through our training program. It's not as much that you can't train them. You could absolutely train them. They just don't want to be trained, and they have the political influence at the company to make sure that they don't have to be. So I don't have a good answer for that. They're actually, executives are one of the biggest problems, and they're the last people that we're ever allowed to educate. Well, we actually we have what we call cyber awareness advocates that work with every user. And so what we try to do is make things very, very friendly, fun, and nice. Like, hey, I am on your team. I'm here to help you become more secure. And we make users aware of their risk, by the way. Because the last thing we want is for that user to hear from their manager that they're in the high-risk group and not know it themselves first. It's amazing, though. When we tell them they're high risk, immediately they stop clicking on things. But I would argue it's carrots. Are you familiar with carrots and sticks? So it's a system of carrots and sticks, and you should almost never use sticks unless you absolutely have to. Focus on carrots. Reward them for doing good. So I told you about how if you click on a fish, immediately get a follow-up email. Well, we also send a follow-up email if they didn't click on the fish. And it says, hey, great job. And it's sort of funny, by a few months in, most users, the only emails they open are the ones that say, great job, you didn't click on the fish. So we don't want to create an environment where people are afraid to do their day job, where they don't want to work there. What we want to do is make sure that they are aware of their role in security. And yeah, you generally get a few where people get a little bit paranoid. But after that wears off, as long as you make it a friendly sort of approach with people, they tend to get back into the regular swing of things, only they're more secure this time. The next thing is what I call microtraining. I would love, and I actually aspire, we're not there yet, but we aspire to do everything by social media rules. So if I'm training people, let's keep it under 144 characters. And let's make our videos 8 seconds long. We're not there. I don't think anyone's there. But I would say, let's make sure all of our videos are 1 minute or less. We don't have to have these massively long videos that cover a ton of topics. And by doing really short interactions, now we can engage with the user a lot more frequently. This, to me, is huge. You have to constantly educate your users. Not just phish your users and attack your users, which is highly important, but we also need to be educating them constantly. So this helps keep it in front of mind. And so, yeah, let's do high-frequency training. At least once a month, every single user in your organization should get a educational email. I would argue that's a little bit of a low frequency, but if we're just getting started and your program is, sort of immature and you're starting to build it out, why not make the goal of let's send out at least one educational email every single month to all of our employees. Another thing is that we need to keep our training specific. Let's keep our messaging to the point. So, I have had a few slides that I have skipped over that had some red text on them. What did it say? No one? Think before you click. So I did that mainly because it's amazing. It's a slide I don't cover, but when I do this talk, most people in the audience tend to walk away with that point. They saw it even though I didn't talk about it. And the point is, keep your messaging simple. The more simple your messaging is, the better you'll do. There's this old movie, A River Runs Through It. It's the most boring movie that was ever made. But they have in it, this guy is constantly trying to shorten his writing, okay? And he keeps making him go back and back and back. And the whole point is that most of what we can say in 100 words could be said in 5 words. So try to say it with as few words as possible and keep it simple. And I actually, before I was a pen tester, I came from a marketing background. And the number one rule that I learned in marketing, and it was one of the hardest things to learn too, was that you have got to keep it, not keep it simple stupid, but no, keep it stupid simple. That it makes for effective marketing. And marketing has the exact same rules as user awareness. Keep your messaging simple, make it as short as possible, use high frequency and a lot of information, and people will remember your message. That's exactly what we need to do in security awareness. The next thing is fish your users. And don't just do regular fishes. Do spear fishes too. You should be spearfishing your users on a regular basis, because that's one of the most detrimental attacks that we could face is a spearfish. And by targeting your users, you get them conditioned to not do these things. In fact, one of the biggest things that we can do is condition our users. That's what gets them to stop clicking more than anything else, is conditioning. When they know you're watching, and when they know that that email is almost definitely from the IT or the SecOps team, it makes a huge difference. So I'm running out of time. Next one is, let's avoid portal overload. We have all the our technology, where things are at. You do not need a user to log in to a portal in order to do education. First of all, that's one more username and password they have to remember that they don't want to remember. It decreases effectiveness because it's another step they have to do. Why don't we deliver all of our education directly to their inbox? That's where the bad guys are at, and that's where we should be at. So, try to avoid portals. We can easily track who watched what video, what they did, who clicked on this, who clicked on that, how much of the video they watched. Did they answer the question at the end of the video? Did they get it right? We can do all of that without a login portal. So try to avoid that. There's too many portals for users already. It tends to make things less effective. So, that's a great point. So what we do is we do two things. We first ask them to set up a nickname. When we write them, we always address them by their nickname that they have selected, whatever they choose. The next thing is, because we want to have multiple factors here, is we ask them to set up a personal passphrase. So if I send you an email with a link in it that I want you to click, that passphrase is always right at the top, and you are addressed by your nickname. So it's just a matter of giving the user a way to know that it's secure and that they can click on it. But that's a great point that I almost forgot to mention, is that you definitely, you spend all this time telling users not to click. When you want them to click, you got to give them a way to know that it's safe to do. Next thing is just-in-time training. So I'm out of time, so I'm going to jump forward. Here's an example of a landing page that's going to invoke a little bit of emotion. It says, think this spider bite is bad? That's nothing compared to being responsible for spreading a ransomware attack. So when they hit on a landing page that gets this and that's what they see, they're going to remember it, and it helps anchor it in emotion. Even if it is just disgust, that's still emotion. So get involved, do one-on-one interviews and coaching if you need to. Do focus groups. Actually, focus groups I think are massively important in this. There are so many instances where there are problems with business processes that are creating risk. And focus groups are going to help you find that out. It's going to help you understand why users are clicking, what made them click on those things. So when you get, let's say, a group of high-risk users, pull them aside, talk to them, find out what makes them high risk, and you'll be surprised at what you learn. Create competition, whatever you can do. In a perfect world, if I were God for a day, I would tie bonuses to your security, your personal security. If you are a risk to the company, I would not give you a bonus at the end of the year. Now, you're not going to get away with that. HR isn't going to like it, but do everything you can to create competition. Pin people against each other in a fun way with maybe a leaderboard. Maybe you do US versus Europe. Maybe you do men versus women. Whatever. Maybe this office versus this office, or accounting versus HR. But create competition. Anything you can do for gamification is highly effective. And if you have a very progressive department and you're allowed to, you can always use shamification too. So that's a wall of shame, we all know. So essentially, use sticks and carrots. I will say carrots are much more effective than sticks. You should avoid sticks at all costs as long as you can. But there has to be a point where it's too much. They represent too much risk to your organization. If you have a domain admin that becomes a high-risk user, think about the potential ramifications and impact of that. And I see I need to run through. So, in summary, real quickly here, in order to secure your users, here are the steps that you can do to make them more secure. Number one, measure everything. Use that data to adjust accordingly. Use high-frequency training about all, define what subjects you have, and then use high-frequency training to cover all of those subjects over the course of a year. I would argue it's not even a big deal if you're only asking for 10 seconds of the employee's time to send out one email a week if you want to. The next one is do high-frequency phishing too. You need to phish your users. The bad guys are doing it, so the only question is if you're going to let them be the only ones in their inbox or if you want to be in their inbox too. You need to phish your users, and you need to spear phish your users as well. The next one, get rid of the dashboard or the portal. Try to deliver content directly to their inbox so that they don't have one more username and password that they have to remember. I use LastPass, but I still get frustrated with all of the logins that I have to remember. So it's a thing. Next, get involved. Get your hands dirty. Actually use human intervention with your employees. Competition. Use a system of sticks and carrots, and make sure to take opportunity to do just-in-time training when their mistake is realized. Right at that moment, users are more open and willing to learn. So, any questions? Awesome. All right, thank you.